if IOTA really does succeed and remove the coordinator, we'll be the first and only blockchain project or distributed ledger project that is not only fully decentralized, but it solves the trilemma, and there's no fees associated with it. That'll be a breakthrough in engineering that I don't think we've ever seen before in a decentralized manner.
Hey everybody, I'm Andrarchy, Head of Communications and Advocacy for Steemit, and today I'm here with Dan Simerman from the IOTA Foundation. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah.
So what do you do at IOTA?
My role is called Head of Financial Relations, and I do a lot at IOTA, but one of the major parts of my role is really building out what I've been calling this financial infrastructure. I think that for the first part of or the last couple of years, I think the major focus of a lot of projects is like, when am I going to get into Binance? And we don't really think about that, right? Like we, as a nonprofit, like we're not really focused on exchanges, but we do think about kind of the financial infrastructure of how are people going to engage with our economy. And that includes our token, that includes all of our services, and how we kind of bring them together in a very cohesive way. So kind of engaging with a lot of partners there, and then also kind of expanding in North America.
We met at the Coinvention conference where we had one of those epic crypto conversations that could have gone on for all of eternity. And
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and it was striking how many similarities we had being more on the marketing side of the crypto and blockchain world, and the similarities between our blockchains. Why don't we talk a little bit about IOTA, what's going on there? Because one of the similarities is that from the outside, it might appear that not a lot has happened on Steem in the last couple of years. A lot of work has been done. We released Hivemind, we released Mira, and communities and smart media tokens will be launching extremely, extremely soon. From the outside, it also seems like not a lot has been done on IOTA's side. Is that the case, or is something else the case?
Yeah, I think you'd have to be pretty crazy to think that there's nothing happening. I mean, I think that it's just hard to follow all of the projects, right? There's like thousands and thousands of projects, right? You can't follow every project the same amount of detail. But, for IOTA, we've grown. We've got over 100 people in our organization, right? I think people don't realize that we started off as even before we were a nonprofit. IOTA just raised $500,000, right? Or it was more of like a crowd fund. And we had these very humble beginnings, right? We didn't issue our tokens to like the founders or to marketing or to, advisors. It really was this kind of fair distribution where anyone who wanted to participate could do so. And so from there, we kind of grew naturally and organically and got to a point that we needed some structure around the work we were doing. So we very quickly organized and developed a foundation based in Berlin. So we've got a nonprofit that we've been housed under, and in the last year, we've hired over 100 people, right? So that alone, we've really grown out our community, not only our community, but also our team. And we've made a lot of progress, not only on the development side, right? So we recently announced our solution to Coordicide, which is how we're going to be removing the little centralized component of our technology called the coordinator. It was always sort of a training wheels until the protocol was strong enough to support full decentralization. And we recently released the simulator for our fast probabilistic consensus algorithm or mechanism that we recently released, that is referenced in our Coordicide paper. So we're making a lot of progress in slow, steady increments. We're making our node software stronger. We've got some interesting hardware announcements in the pipeline. So I think people forget that it's not just about the GitHub activity. It's also about creating corporate partnerships. It's also about working with regulators. It's also about just general awareness. So there's a lot of components that I think that make up moving a project along. And I know I work 12 hours a day, so there's so much work happening behind the scenes. And I think one of the reasons, and this is something you're going to see, I think, change in the next couple of weeks, we're really going to be focusing or doing a better job focusing on some of our development updates. Because I think sometimes there's so much stuff that's being done that it's hard to quantify that. within kind of all the work that's happening and everything that's being released. So we're going to be doing a better job of kind of framing our technical releases in a way that make them easier to digest.
Yeah, we've definitely struggled with some of those issues too. And I think this is something that came up in our conversation, which is that you can either be doing the engineering work or you can be talking about the engineering work. But it's much more difficult to do both at the same time than people think.
The other thing too, I think what people don't often realize is, at least for IOTA, we redesigned the entire, concept of what it means to be a distributed ledger, right? I think oftentimes when you see other projects that are moving faster, oftentimes they're just, copy and paste from other blockchain GitHubs. So when you have that in place, it's easy to just release updates because there's kind of like a playbook. For us, we're doing cutting edge research. We've got a massive research team. We work very closely with academia because we're solving these problems around scalability, decentralization, security that have never been implemented before in a way that we are suggesting is possible. So that takes a lot of time and a lot of care, right? Especially when you've got almost $1 billion worth of value on a network. You have to be very careful about the changes that you make.
One of the things I wanted to talk about, another parallel between our two protocols, is that we're both one of the few protocols that has feeless token transfers, which enables microtransactions. And we think that this is...
That's really interesting. I before you mentioned it, I really didn't know.
The fact that people aren't aware of either of our solutions or don't think that this is a huge deal. I mean, I remember when this was the holy grail of finance, fast, feeless tokens.
Yeah, so this is something that we talked about, which was one of my favorite parts of the conversation is that we had in Philadelphia, is that I think oftentimes people think that IOTA is just a kind of machine-to-machine protocol. And I think that is one of our bread and butter. Is that how you say it? But I've always kind of seen us as this connective tissue between the human economy and the machine economy. It's going to be this protocol. It's going to be this communications layer where human activity and machine activity can coordinate and collaborate. And what comes with that, I think, is also a really a necessary thing, is a value transfer mechanism. You need a way for devices and humans to engage in economic activity, right? If the human wants to pay the device for something, or the device wants to pay the human for something. And how we envision it is that we think that devices aren't going to necessarily engage in economic activity the same way that a device might, that a human might, right? So a human might spend $10 a month on Netflix, and a device might spend, a fraction of a penny per every API call in a pay-per-use model. And we think in a literal sense, it's going to be difficult to do that with, a legacy system like PayPal, where you can't do true microtransactions. But you also can't do that with other blockchains that have that you have to pay miners and stakers, right? So if you have to pay 5 cents for a transaction and you want to send a half a cent, the economics of that doesn't really work. So that's kind of the first thing. And how we're able to do that is that, because of how our distributed ledger is designed, we don't have any miners and stakers. So you don't have to pay a fee to someone in order to keep the blockchain afloat. So we don't really have these really clear economic incentives. They're more utility driven incentives.
The core of it probably comes down to the different consensus algorithms. So with Steem, we have delegated proof of stake. That's certainly critical to achieving the feeless nature. That's how EOS does it too. Whereas with IOTA, I think it comes down to the Tangle. Could you talk a little bit about what the Tangle is and what maybe differentiates it from a blockchain?
Yeah, so I'm sure that a lot of the Steemit community has heard of IOTA and is familiar with the architecture, but just as a little update. So right, we're not a blockchain, right? All blockchains are distributed ledgers. Not all distributed ledgers are blockchains. We created this mechanism called the Tangle, which is a shorthand, DAG is shorthand for that, even though DAG is still a blockchain. But essentially what we did is that rather than putting transactions into blocks that have to be mined, the transactions are just sent by a node. And that could be a computer, that could be a device, that could be an edge device on a network. And essentially if they want to contribute to the network, all they have to do is send a little bit, is do a little bit of proof of work to verify 2 transactions on the network. So, right, so if they want to send 1 transaction, they have to validate 2 transactions. It's a very simple utility-driven model. And the thought process behind that is that if a device wants to take part and contribute and be part of this free data transfer mechanism across the world, they just have to contribute a little bit of energy in order to do that. And that's kind of version 1. We're moving into this new consensus mechanism, the fast probabilistic consensus mechanism, or core-to-side we're calling it. And we're going to have something called MANA. I can't get too much into it because I'm not incredibly technical, but essentially we're going to be adding like proof of reputation of it to nodes, so that we can tell when nodes are honest or when they're not based on their history, and how tokens are transferred will have something to do with that. But I can tell you that we really want to keep in line with this method, with this idea that value transfer should be free on a network. And there's a lot of interesting reasons why we think that's the case, but when a lot of projects are positioning themselves as the next internet, and this is a conversation we had, ad nauseum at the conference, there's this idea that, you're going to be able to replace the free and open internet with this like Frankenstein where you have to, click a link and then pay a fee every time you engage with like a D app. I don't really see that kind of working from a usability perspective, but also from like an economic perspective, it doesn't seem to make sense.
So it seems like basically you have a very efficient proof of work algorithm. So you're currently using proof of work, but because you only have to validate a tiny number of transactions, it's very easy work to do.
Yeah, you're doing it individually at the node level, right? So it's not a group of miners coming together or like pooling their resources together. It really is like, if I have a transaction to send, or if I want to open up a MAM channel, which is mass authenticated messaging, you just have to do that little bit of proof of work to verify. It's for like spam protection. It's to make sure that there aren't any nefarious actors on the network.
So what do you think are the most exciting things that are coming to IOTA within the next year? Are there any big developments, hardware, software that we should keep our eye out for?
There's obviously core-to-side, right? Like if IOTA really does succeed and remove the coordinator, we'll be the first and only blockchain project or distributed ledger project that is not only fully decentralized, but it solves the trilemma, and there's no fees associated with it. That'll be a breakthrough in engineering that I don't think we've ever seen before in a decentralized manner. That's going to be very exciting. We're going to be working on that. We spend so much time on moving towards that goal. I also
Trilemma, for those who don't know,
scalability, decentralization, and security.
It's relatively easy to accomplish 2 of these, but 3 is exponentially more difficult.
It's very, and then I think even on top of that, it's difficult to solve all 3 while having no economic incentive. I think people often forget, like that might even be like the 4th leg. Because I think what you're going to see is that maybe in the future, in the next like 3-4 years, you're going to find other projects saying we've solved the trilemma. Like there's some of our competitors that have recently come up and suggested that they have. But I think as long as you have a fee associated with it, then you really haven't solved. I think fees are kind of a component of scalability in like a non-technical way. Another thing we're really, really excited about is Cubic, which is quorum-based computations, and that allows for a variation of smart contracts, which I know a lot of people have been asking for on the IOTA protocol. It's a second layer solution. But I also think a lot of the work, I think the most exciting work really that we're doing is behind the scenes that's not necessarily technical. Like not a lot of people know that we're working with a standards body called OMG, the OMG group. Richard Soley's on our board, and we're actually working with industry to turn IOTA into a standard. And oftentimes, you can't really find mass adoption, like industry adoption, unless you're an open standard and open source. And I think a lot of people in our space are really only focusing on being an open source protocol. But if you don't create a standard that other technology companies can contribute to or feel comfortable with, like if you don't have the right licensing, it can really inhibit adoption. So we're pretty far along in that process relative to other projects. And I think you're going to see some more announcements soon about a lot of the work we're doing around standardization. I think that's a very, very big component of the work we're doing.
You come at this from a marketing perspective. Do you think a lot about how to communicate this stuff in ways that ordinary people can understand? Because I know that within the Steem ecosystem, this is an issue that is very near and dear to a lot of users' hearts, is that they feel that not enough has been done to communicate the innovation in a way that anyone can understand. And I do my best, and it's part of my job to try to figure out new and better ways to communicate this information, but I'm always looking to learn more. Any insights on that?
Yeah, I mean, you're never going to make the whole community happy, right? I mean, we've both got massive communities. We've got I think hundreds of thousands at this point. But you said a couple things there that I just wanted to call out. The first one, sometimes I think using the word marketing kind of cheapens it in a lot of people's words, because I think marketing can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. For me, my background's branding and consumer psychology. I love thinking about how people think about things and how they interpret things and what happens when you give someone a piece of data and how they digest it. So in that sense, yeah, to me, it's really interesting how we frame this conversation. And I think where it's a little easier for Steem is that people know social media, people know Medium, and they know blogging. And that's a very simple concept. For us, we've become so synonymous with IoT that people don't really know what IoT is, right? I get into arguments sometimes with people from the foundation. They're like, oh yeah, everyone knows what IoT is. And I'm like, no, everyone does not know what IoT is. And I can even speak to myself. I worked in IT consulting. I worked with companies and built out systems as a product manager for a couple of years. And even I remember going, hearing about IoT in 2013, 2014, and having no idea what anyone was talking about. And I was pretty technical for a non-technical person. So I think that there's just a big barrier there. And I just had this conversation with my US counterpart a couple hours ago, that how I like to explain it is that I think IoT, people often forget that IoT is going to be an extension of us, right? Devices are going to be an extension of us. I think you said it pretty well. So it's not just there's going to be a toaster and there's going to be a washing machine and they're all just talking to each other. It's our data, right? It's you can think of it as a constellation of different data points that are all just connected by you, the identity. And this might be even a little too conceptual when I explain to people kind of what we are, but I think at a very basic level, how I like to frame it is that, IOTA really is this connective tissue between the human economy and the machine economy. And as we become even more interconnected, we're going to need a really safe, secure mechanism to do that. So whether you know about computing or not, I think everyone realizes that, especially in today's the climate we're living in, there's a lot of open questions about privacy and data and security. And I think if you frame it that way, that this is about what's going to happen in 10 years, and are we going to be using systems that protect our data and allow us to control our data and our privacy, or ones where, it's kind of available on an open market. And I think regardless of who you are, I think that's a very easy story to understand. And then just applying it to IoT, it's the same thing, right? You're going to have hundreds of devices that are associated with you. It could be your phone, it could be your lamp, it could be your car. And how do you want them all to all communicate? Do you want them to all be part of a system that is controlled by you, or do you want them to be controlled by different companies and then having your data kind of leak out to all of these different services? And then you talk about security as well. It's different if someone hacks into a social security number service and steals your ID, and then we all kind of forget about it next week. It's another thing if someone hacks into your car and drives you off the road, or hacks into a centralized database and kills everyone with a pacemaker. I think that there's another level of privacy and security when we talk about IoT devices. So I don't know if that answers your question around the positioning and kind of the psychology behind it, but I really like to think that we're more this connective tissue that brings us together. I think that the token is that's also a really big component of that as well. The token and the data transfer mechanism. So I always try to use really simple human-centric wording, because at the end of the day, we're humans and we need to understand this.
Yeah, I like the metaphor of connective tissue, and I hope you won't mind if I maybe use that, but modify it to we're the connective tissue between human beings, and your application can tie into that connective tissue. So,
yeah, you need to, and I think, you asked me like the branding. I think you have to put visuals in people's heads, especially when you're not playing at the application layer. I think that for Steam, it's a really clear story, right? It's like social media that is owned by the person who's creating it. Like, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's a really easy story to tell. It's all really about the stories that we're telling. And I think people don't realize that we're kind of in a story war. Like, this is just as much about competing for your story in a marketplace of stories, right? Go down the list of all the thousands of protocols. Everyone has a slightly different story. And I think at the end of the day, whoever's going to win out is whoever tells the best story.
We've covered a lot of ground. Are there any last things that you want to communicate to our audience about IOTA and what you guys are doing, or someplace they should go, a website, white paper? I mean, I feel like you guys have got a lot of papers now.
We've got too much out there. Yeah, I would just say, we've grown, like you said earlier, like we've grown a lot in the past year and a half. And, I know a lot of people maybe caught us in 2017 when we spiked like everyone else. And that brought a lot of interest towards us. And, we had a pretty terrible wallet back then, or our network was, just couldn't handle all of the power that we had, all the processing. But, you should come check out we have one of the best wallets in the game right now. It's called the Trinity wallet. So if you Google IOTA Trinity, or I think it's trinity.iota.org, we've got a beautiful desktop mobile wallet you can come play around with. It's gorgeous. It's like industry standard. You should play around with the token if you're play around with the Tangle if you're a developer. We've got some incredible and entrepreneurs and ecosystem partners that are coming on and starting to build on us. And I know a lot of people knew about us and heard about us and maybe even play with us a little bit back then, but we've done so much in the past year that you should come in and join our Discord. We've got, I think, close to 40,000 people in there, and just come in and chat. And I would love to hear your thoughts, because we're very active in there. And I think kind of one of the things, we found a lot of similarities, I think, in two of our communities. And one of the biggest ones is like how big and how active our community is. I think one of the other things that these VC coins don't really quite realize, that you can't buy community. And, I think people really believe in the Steemit and the IOTA visions. And that's why we have such a vibrant, active community that loves participating, because they feel like they're really part of something bigger than themselves. So that's certainly why I do it. And that's why I work way too much on all this. So thank you for having me on. I'm really happy we got a chance to chat. And I hope we can do it again. I feel like we talked about a fraction of what there's so much we could go on. So hopefully have me back on in the future.
Yeah, no, I'd love to talk with you some more. Maybe people can leave suggestions about topics to cover in future conversations in the comment sections to the Steemit post.